I built our dream business brick by brick, but they filed me as a liability until the audit revealed who owned the ground. I still remember the first time I laid my hands on that vacant plot of land. Dust in the wind, hope in my lungs, and fire in my veins. It wasn't much, just a cracked patch behind an abandoned mill. But to me, it was everything. That's where it all began. Back then, it wasn't our business. It was just mine and my late father's sketch in a leather notebook. A business of integrity, built from sweat and grit. But after his death, I promised I would carry the dream forward. Then came them, the cousins, the in-laws, the so-called partners who never lifted a single brick, but came running when the cement hardened. They came with smiles and handshakes, promises of trust and unity, and I, blind in hope, let them in. We worked through nights, bled through winters. I gave up sleep, missed my wedding anniversary, sold my motorcycle to pay salaries. I treated every worker like family. Every screw tightened felt like a prayer answered. Slowly, it took shape, a towering structure of glass and steel, ambition and loyalty. We called it Zara Group, after my mother. Everyone praised us, but few knew it was me who stayed awake when payrolls didn't match, who signed every risky contract, who faced down the inspectors. I wasn't building a company. I was building a legacy. It started small, the whispers in board meetings, the changed passwords, the sudden exclusions from group chats. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself, they're family. They wouldn't. But then came the quarterly meeting. I was late by 7 minutes. The room was silent. Their eyes, cold. A man in a gray suit, whom I'd never seen before, handed me a paper. Effective immediately, your role is suspended pending financial audit and misconduct review. Misconduct? I laughed, literally, until I saw their faces. Not a smirk, not a blink, just stone. They said I was a liability. They said I made reckless decisions, like when I approved the emergency funding for our workers' children's hospital. The very same hospital that now bore the family name, but not mine. I walked out that day in silence. No farewell, no thanks. Just a folder in my hand and a knife in my back. For weeks, I vanished. No texts, no calls. My phone buzzed with fake sympathies. I hope you're okay. They did what they had to. Stay strong, brother. But no one offered the truth. In that silence, I began to remember who I was before they rebranded me. Not a co-founder, not a partner, but a builder. Creator. And they had made one mistake. In their greed to control the top, they forgot who laid the ground beneath their feet. You see, when I built this business, I had no money. So I used what I had, the land. I never signed it over. I was always told, ownership is about papers, not presence. So, while they built upward, I quietly kept my hands on the roots. I hired a quiet man named Hafez, forensic accountant, ex-FBR investigator. No media, no emails, just tea and truth. We went through every document, every transfer, every audit they'd avoided for 5 years. What we found was enough to shatter glass. They had restructured the company into 5 shells. They funneled profits through fake vendors. They used my signature, forged on a loan that defaulted. And most importantly, the company was sitting on land I never sold. Hafez smiled. They built a mansion on borrowed soil. We filed a quiet civil case. No noise, no threats, just a court order and the law. On the day of their annual gala, with press, investors, and dignitaries, the court's officer walked in with a seizure notice. The ground under the entire HQ belonged to me. Every structure they built, every deal they signed, all standing illegally. They called me Now they wanted to talk. I picked up, only once. I was a liability, remember? I said. You filed me out. Now I file you down. They begged for mercy, offered money, shares, even apologies. But I didn't want any of it. I wanted their empire to remember whose hands they spat on. So I evicted them, one floor at a time, brick by brick. Media exploded. Founder destroys own company in landmark legal twist. Real owner emerges from shadows. One by one, their fake shells were exposed. Tax fraud, embezzlement, insider trading. Some fled. Some were arrested. The brand still exists, under new ownership. But that building? It's no longer called Sarah Group. I renamed it Almond Foundation after my father. And I turned their grand boardroom into a school for entrepreneurs. Free, open, honest. Years later, one of them came to me. The one who laughed the loudest in that meeting. He asked for a job. I offered him tea instead. In the same room he kicked me out of. He looked around, eyes heavy. You really built it all, didn't you? I smiled. No, I said. I just built the ground. They forgot it remembers. It took Hafiz and me nearly 2 months to map the rot. Every shady vendor they created had a paper trail. Every under-the-table transaction had an unbalanced ledger entry. I used to think business was about dreams and ideas. Turns out, the real power lies in receipts. We built a file, a thick one. We named it Foundation Reclaimed. Page 1? The original land deed. Signed by the city. Stamped. With my name alone. And tucked beneath it, a clause I insisted on back in 2010. No corporate ownership transfer unless deed owner authorizes structural claim. They laughed when I added that line. Just legal fluff, they said. Now that fluff was their news. I didn't send threats. I sent paper. An envelope. Cream-colored. Inside, the audit findings, signed, sealed, and certified. It landed on their desk during a budget meeting. I wasn't there. But Hafez told me what happened. One read it and turned pale. Another started to sweat. One tried to laugh it off. Until they reached the line that said, your headquarters is situated on property not legally owned by your registered holding entity. Immediate risk of seizure applies. And suddenly, no one was laughing. I waited. They tried to reach out. Voicemails, emails, even an old friend they knew I trusted. But I stayed quiet. For years, I spoke with honesty and they answered with betrayal. Now, silence was my weapon. I started receiving notifications. Lawyers scrambling, board members resigning, investors pulling out. And yet, I didn't move. Because the next move was checkmate. The eviction was scheduled for Monday, 9 a.m. They thought they could stop it, delay it, buy it back. But the law doesn't bow to boardrooms. When the officers arrived, cameras followed. I watched it live, not from the street, but from a quiet cafe across the road. Hafez sat beside me. Come. We sipped tea as the words were spoken aloud. You are hereby ordered to vacate the premises. This land is no longer under your control. They argued, cried, threatened. I didn't blink. The company I built had been taken from me. But the ground it stood on had always been mine. And now it remembered. But I wasn't done. See, seizing land was one thing. Clearing my name was another. So we filed a countersuit. Fraudulent use of identity. Embezzlement. Defamation. contract manipulation, forced expulsion. Their lawyers came in smug, but they didn't expect Hafez to walk in with videos, signatures, and emails from their own accounts, proving everything. One by one, the documents were read aloud. Each revelation cut deeper than the last. One judge looked up and said, "You filed him out as a liability, but he owned the ground you stand on." Why? No one answered. Because they knew the truth. It wasn't just legal. It was personal. In the final hearing, one of them, Tarek, my cousin, broke down. He asked to speak privately. We sat in the same room we'd once planned our expansion in. He couldn't meet my eyes. "I didn't know they'd go this far," he said. "But you signed the vote," I reminded him. "I was scared," he whispered. I thought we could build bigger without you." I nodded. Then I stood up. "Now you know," I said. "And now you'll live with it." I didn't keep the building for luxury. I didn't even rename it with my own name. I called it Alman Foundation. I transformed the top floor into an open incubator, free office space for dreamers who had nothing but vision. The floor below? A clinic for employees. No more ignoring worker health to save profits. And that boardroom? I left it empty, with just one plaque on the door. Where greed sat, where legacy rose. Weeks later, I received a handwritten note. It read, "You were never the liability. You were the backbone. We were just too blind to see." I folded it and placed it in a drawer. No reply. Not because I was bitter, but because by then I had already moved forward. Not up, forward. 6 months later, a young intern working in the new foundation approached me nervously. He said, "Sir, there's something odd in the vault records from 2012. You may want to see this." He handed me a dusty folder. Inside it, a contract signed by one of the original partners, backdated, attempting to secretly transfer land ownership to a hidden offshore trust. But it never went through. The notary had caught it, marked it void, which meant they knew from the very beginning. They knew they could never truly erase me. And still, they tried. I sat alone that night, holding the dusty folder that proved their betrayal ran deeper than I imagined. My hands trembled as I opened my father's old leather notebook, the one that started it all. There, on the first page, in faded ink, he had written, "Build it with honor. Even if they steal the roof, make sure the ground beneath it always remembers your name." Tears welled up. I remembered his hands, cracked and calloused, placing bricks beside me. The way he spoke, not with pride, but with patience. And the last words he whispered before he passed. "Don't ever give them the soil beneath your feet, Beta. The world will try to take everything else." He knew. Even then, he knew. A week later, I went to the graveyard. 2 headstones. My father's and my mother's, side by side. I hadn't visited in months. Maybe longer. I sat between them like I used to as a boy when they'd hold my hands. "I did it," I whispered. "I didn't just fight back. I made them remember what you built, what we built." I placed 2 things before them. A photo of the building, renamed, reborn. The original land deed. Then I promised, quietly, no one will ever erase our name again. Weeks passed. Then came the unexpected knock at my door. It was Seema, my former partner, and the one I once trusted most. She looked tired, defeated. She held a folder, but her hands shook. "I didn't come to beg," she said. "I came to admit." She sat across from me, tears in her eyes. "We thought you'd slow us down, that you were too soft. But you were the only one who knew what this business meant. To people. To families." She slid the folder across the table. Inside, proof of the offshore fund, hidden for years by Tarek and her. "I want to testify," she whispered. "Not for you. For your father." I looked at her for a long time. Then I said, "Truth doesn't undo betrayal, Seema, but it buries it. So maybe you can help bury it." She nodded. For once, not as a partner, just as a person trying to be human again. Her testimony changed everything. Public opinion turned. News headlines screamed. Founder exonerated in landmark business betrayal case. Truth buried beneath the boardroom finally emerges. The trial ended with a full exoneration of my name, not just legally, but publicly. Every major investor pulled out of the original group. The shell companies collapsed, and the government seized the accounts of those involved in tax fraud. A judge, in his closing remarks, said, "You don't build legacy through acquisition. You build it through sacrifice." And he, the so-called liability, was the only one who paid the price. One day, Afeas handed me a sealed envelope. "Found this in the original file room, hidden in the wall." Inside was a voice note, old, recorded by my father on a mini tape. He sounded weak, but his voice was steady. "Son, if you're hearing this, they tried to erase you. I feared this would happen. But remember, a dream built brick by brick cannot be burned by those who never held the hammer. If they break it, rebuild. If they bury you, bloom." I listened to it a dozen times. Each time, the anger melted, and something else took root: peace. I sat down that night and wrote a letter. Not to them, not even to myself. To the next dreamer who might walk in my shoes one day. They'll laugh when you start. They'll doubt when you grow. And when you build something beautiful, they'll try to take it. Let them. But build it on truth. On ground no paper can steal. And always remember, you are not a liability. You are the foundation. I sealed it, placed it in the new library in the Almond Foundation, and walked away. 5 years later, the old building stands tall, not as a monument to revenge, but as a tribute to resolve. Students walk its halls. Families eat at the canteen I once dreamt of. A plaque outside reads, "Here stood a man they tried to bury, but they forgot he was the ground." Sometimes people ask where I went after it all. I smile. "I'm still building," I say. "Just not what they can steal this time."